My 7-year-old claims to be a bit of a sports fan. If you ask him, he'll tell you that his favorite team is the Boston Red Sox. If you were to press him for details, he might say something like, "I love it when David Ortiz hits a touchdown." Wait a minute. Hits a touchdown? Without knowing very much about my 7-year-old, you just discovered that his knowledge of baseball, his knowledge of football, in fact, his knowledge of the Red Sox and touchdowns is remarkably limited. In a similar fashion, when you use or misuse jargon in economics, you reveal information about your competence. This presentation will introduce you to some terminology that we use and hopefully convince you that using jargon correctly is very important for conveying competence. In this presentation, we're going to focus on 3 pieces of terminology in macroeconomics. The first one is called the fallacy of composition. The second is opportunity cost. And the third piece of terminology is known as the big principle. First, the fallacy of composition. The fallacy of composition is the idea that the whole, the big picture, is qualitatively different than just adding up all of the pieces. Let me give you a couple of examples. Imagine that as you approach graduation, somebody says to you, "You should really think about going to law school. You have great potential as a lawyer, and the career opportunities will be fantastic." So you spend the next 3 years of your life engaged in the work of going to law school, only to discover when you graduate that lots of other people got the same advice. In fact, too many of you went to law school, and what turned out to be a great idea for you was a disastrous idea when everybody else followed the same advice. I'll give you another example. Once again, the fallacy of composition refers to a situation where the big picture looks different than just adding up all the individual pieces. Let's talk about a second example. Your body is composed of trillions of cells. Trillions of cells that are each invisible to the naked eye. Scientists tell us that you have 20 to 30 trillion red blood cells within your body at any given time as an adult human. We know that there are 100 billion neurons in your brain. And yet, when you add up all these trillions of cells, each essentially invisible to the naked eye, what do you get? Is the person sitting next to you invisible to your eye? Of course not. In fact, when we look around, what we see are very visible individuals, each composed of trillions and trillions of invisible cells. That's the fallacy of composition. Adding up the individual pieces gives you something qualitatively different. By the way, the visible guy in the picture is Ben Bernanke, very famous, very important economist. We'll talk about him later in the course. The next term on our list is opportunity cost. Opportunity cost refers to the idea that whenever we deal with scarcity in economics, which we do all the time, whenever we deal with scarcity, and when that scarcity requires us to choose among competing options, the term opportunity cost is what we use to refer to your next best option. Not the one you picked, but your very next best option. Another way to think about opportunity cost is that it represents the sacrifice that is involved when you make a choice. And opportunity cost is, in fact, one of the most important ways that economists think about the word cost. Let me give you a couple of examples of opportunity cost. Attending to this presentation right now involves a choice, and it involves a scarcity of your time and your attention. Doing instead of all the different possibilities of what you could personally be doing right now, your next best option, the next choice that makes the most sense other than this, represents the cost of attending to this presentation, or more precisely, the opportunity cost. I'll give you a second example. This course, Introduction to Macroeconomics, is a choice. And when you exercise the choice to take this course, to do the work involved, to complete this course, for the credits that you want on your transcript, use scarce resources, time, attention, and money. Those scarce resources could be used for lots of other things. Your next best option for using those resources represents the opportunity cost of the Introduction to Macroeconomics for you. Taking courses at Keene State College is another choice where scarcity is involved, and so this represents a third example of opportunity cost. Instead of attending Keene State, you could be putting your time and energy into earning income, going to a different school, or caring for loved ones, or doing something more leisurely. But whatever your next best option is, it represents the opportunity cost of attending Keene State. Our final example is government spending. Government spending, while seemingly infinite and limitless, is in fact not. It's finite, and though it is very large, the dollars that our government spends represent choices where those dollars could have been spent on something else. And therefore, each decision to spend money that the government makes is indeed a decision that comes with an opportunity cost. You need to be really careful, because while opportunity cost talks about what you could have done instead when you make a choice, and even though opportunity cost suggests that there are many, many possible alternatives, not all the alternatives represent the actual opportunity cost. You have to focus on what the next best option was, because that's where the resources could have gone instead. But that second best option also has an opportunity cost, which would be the third option, and so on. The final bit of jargon that I'd like to introduce you to in this presentation is called the pig principle. I find it interesting that the pig principle has hardly ever been written about in economics textbooks across a wide range of courses that I've taught over the years. Nonetheless, the pig principle is present in virtually every single economics course that you will be exposed to. So what is it? Well, the pig principle says that if something is good, then more is always better. If ice cream is good, then 2 scoops are better than 1. Half a gallon is better than 2 scoops. 5 gallons is better than half a gallon. If something is good, then more is always better. Careful, because the pig principle is embedded in almost everything we do. And I want you to watch for the places in this course where the pig principle shows up without even being named. I want you to also think about how the terminology that we've introduced today is interactive. So, for instance, water is good. In fact, life without water is inconceivable. We all need it to survive. And yet, more water is not necessarily always better. That's an application of the fallacy of composition. Suggests that maybe the pig principle isn't quite as accurate or all-encompassing as we might believe. Finally, one last parting thought before we end this presentation. That 7-year-old who claims to be a bit of a sports fan is really into soccer. Don't ask him about baseball or football, but take him to the park with a soccer ball, and you'll have one very enthusiastic 7-year-old on your hands.